Hello, YouTube, Facebook, wherever you're finding us, Instagram possibly. We are live. All right. And today we're going to be talking about uh, weight. And it's not something I read or see a lot with development, but it's an important part. Um, and so I think we should talk about it. It plays a role. But I think we also need to distinguish, like Heather just said before we jumped on, cause versus symptoms. And so, jumping into this all, we're seeing, especially with the pandemic, right? As kids are stuck inside, or we're stuck for a year, and all the foods that we shouldn't eat are all the good, delicious foods, right? So they're there, and we're not leaving the house, and so this can be a challenge for some kids, but more importantly, how is it impacting development? Is this a cause? Is this a symptom? And so let's dive into that a little bit and talk about it. So I'll just tell you right off the bat, one of my main concerns with weight is less movement, right? It's just harder on their body. They tend to move a little bit less, can make sports or other activities more difficult. And as Heather and I always discuss, movement is key. It drives development in the brain. It's very, very important. And so one of the things that I've noticed is, the kids who do struggle with weight tend to move less, and they have more neural muscle skeletal concerns and issues as a whole. So, but Heather, I thought you brought a great point. Let's talk a little bit about cause versus symptoms, and the difference between those two, and what you were mentioning before we jumped on. Let's dive into that a little bit.
Yes, I don't think it's extremely intuitive that a lot of times neurodevelopmental issues lead to an unhealthy relationship with food. And I do not just mean emotional eating. That's one aspect that people hear about.
Right.
But just for example, with ADHD, let me back up for a second and say the researchers very consistently find links between childhood obesity and reading problems, ADHD, autism. The list goes on, anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
But it's important to think about what are some of the issues with some of these neurodevelopmental issues and how do they relate to what I choose to put in my body. Eating healthfully. If I want to back up one more time, I'm sorry, and say this is not about appearance. This is about mental, physical, emotional health. 100%. And that is something we definitely need to get across to kids, that if people are saying, I don't like my body, and a lot of kids who are not struggling with weight think they are. I'm fat. I don't like this. I'm ugly. And kids will not buy into, oh, you're beautiful. That is not something they are ready to accept. So what is something they do like about themselves? What is a neutral comment that is not self-deprecating? And then gradually, once we kind of rewire the brain in that way, we can keep moving more and more positive. But executive function is required to live a healthy lifestyle. You have to have perseverance, follow through. You have to have planning. You have to remember to pull that meat out of the freezer, pick up the fruits and vegetables at the grocery store, etc. There is so much planning, organization, time management involved in eating healthfully. It's really good to have, make it a fun cooking event with the family so that there's a fun thing associated with this healthy thing you're eating, and talking about what all does your body do for you, aside from having them think of something positive about themselves physically, but help them realize your body's an instrument that serves you. What are some things it does for you, so that they get beyond the superficial when they think about their bodies. But like with ADHD, if they have low GABA, that's one of our neurotransmitters that leads to impulsivity. We have a lot of kids who are impulsive with or without ADHD. And so a lot of times they don't even like it. They do it because it's there. It's mindless eating. And with screen time, Brian was talking about sedentary lifestyle. With that, how many times do people nosh on food and they're not even processing the fact that they're eating? So there's that. There is, I need a dopamine rush. That's reward center. That's malfunctioning in my brain. And so they seek out carbs and sugars. And then a lot of times their bodies are slower to process the glucose. And so they keep eating because they're not feeling that high from it. There is, I put something on my page today about procrastinating, and then you just grab what's easy, and that goes in with it. There is emotional hyper-arousal, which is a very overlooked sign of ADHD. ADHD is such a misnomer with what people think of when the name does not describe what's going on. And I'm not talking about labels. I'm talking about these types of challenges. And so a lot of people have social anxiety. And so I'm going to distract myself with this food over here in the corner, and because that gives me an excuse not to go talk to people. I have food in my mouth. They have unhealthy sleep cycles, and then that messes up your metabolism. They have difficulty feeling that we've talked about the interoceptive sensory system. It's not just the big five, the things you take in from the environment. The same kids who have trouble knowing where they are in space, equilibrium, body awareness, may not properly sense hunger and fullness and thirst, just like they don't feel tension or that gut feeling in their stomach. That is the yellow warning sign that they're about to escalate, so that emotions catch up with them. That is only a few of the reasons why neurodevelopmental struggles lead to an unhealthy, rejection sensitivity. Well, this ice cream isn't going to talk back to me. This ice cream isn't going to reject me. All or nothing, inflexible thinking. If I can't eat perfectly, then who cares? And I'm going to go the other direction. Or with an eating disorder, I've got to be perfect. And then it can be related to OCD, obsessions and compulsions. I'll be quiet now. There's a lot from neurodevelopment standpoint.
We could probably put this into a 2 or 3 week series here, actually. But I want to go back to, there's a different thing. So one of the things you mentioned was the dopamine hits. And I know lots of my kids love it, much like what you've mentioned before is why screen time and video games are so addictive, right? Is they get the little reward. And so we keep eating, we keep going after it. And to be fair, this food is designed for that, right? Okay, so we're not blaming anybody. The manufacturers intentionally make this hit the dopamine center, reward, and so that's why we all love it, right? That's why you can go handful after handful doing it. It's just it rewards the system, and so they've made it this way. But I think that's really important because lots of these kids struggle with this, and they, just like they struggle with screen time and video games, right? Because they're constantly being rewarded. And so I think that's a really important point that you mentioned. But I also want to mention, as Heather and I have talked about, part of that fight or flight system, part of that develops out of the brainstem, right? And so if we have primitive reflexes and we don't have that neurology develop, this part of the brain, that fight or flight portion, also doesn't develop properly. And so we get things like leaky gut, which we've heard of with like gluten sensitivities and other things, but that all is kind of tied together. So that's why so many of these kids, it's just one of the symptoms that we see with this, right? There's the brain development concerns, there's primitive reflexes, there's emotional regulation concerns, there's executive function struggles. That's all related. That's why we see this all put together. But I love how you talked about planning, right? So if we have kids that struggle with eating healthy, part of that's just their inability to plan and make, good decisions in that moment, right? They're more impulsive because of development. So what are maybe some ways that we can help them with that? Obviously planning, right? That's one of the big things that we can do as parents, but are there other things that we can help do to establish good routines?
Yes. I mean, depending on the child's age, when they're teens, you have less control over what they eat because you're not with them as much. But if it's not there, it can't be a temptation. I mean, kids are always watching what we do. We have to set a good example. Some of these things are obvious, but at the same time, it's such a busy lifestyle, so it needs to be, do take their preferences into consideration, do give them choices, but the choices are between healthy foods.
Yep.
It's so important to work on mindfulness, and for several reasons. One is it brings down stress, and then you don't have the stress eating, but also I am present in this moment and I'm taking in the sensory experience. And it's great to take in the breeze on your skin and the sunshine and the smells and the sights and all of that. But they must have internal sensory system. Have them start really paying attention to their breath, paying attention to their heartbeat. Have them do body maps of when they're feeling emotionally escalated, and draw on their body what they're feeling, to really get the logical brain and the subconscious processing working as a team, because then that can help them start noticing, I'm full, help them understand these. If you have literal, logical, concrete kids, having little mottos that eat until you're satisfied, not until you're stuffed. But satisfied and stuffed are abstract. So then talk through that in literal, concrete terms. But body maps are excellent. Introduce them to their future selves. We've talked about this on a different show, but it applies here as well. It's been a while since we talked about that. We tend to treat, especially kids, tend to treat their future selves as a stranger instead of a friend. There are even apps that you can get that will age photos of them a certain number of years. And this is your friend. How would you take care of you now if it's going to impact him? And you can even without that say, what would you say to a friend who is saying this to you? It's very important to bring it from the subconscious to the conscious, but not make it about looks. Talk about health, talk about what their goals are and how their eating habits will impact that. Talk about their struggles and how this will make their struggles easier, because the wrong foods also impact our emotions, our behaviors, our cognitive function. And so if they are to a point that they do have goals, if they're not, sit down and write SMART goals and then connect how these steps go into helping them reach their goal. And you're also working on their executive function, which is necessary to follow the healthy lifestyle. Plan family outings that are active, not just, there's nothing wrong with movie night, but you got to mix in, and it doesn't have to be, we're going for a walk, because that's boring for kids. You can make it a scavenger hunt. You can go find a rock wall, climb that, make it something adventurous and fun that will get their exercise, gets the reward centers going. And then they don't need to fill it with the food. I mean, everybody knows about eat right, exercise. If it was that simple, we wouldn't have this epidemic of obesity. But think about why it's happening, connect it to things they care about, and anytime you can make things their idea with you steering the ship, there's more buy-in, there's more intrinsic motivation.
Love it. One of the things that you said I loved is just making that connection for them. So I had one kiddo who, a diet was a big factor in his behavior and his overall healing. And so when parents tied in and they started having him record, he would eat ice cream, and then they would, a few hours later, they'd ask him how he feel, and he would rate it, right? Like he would start grading himself and how he felt. And then he started seeing that every time I, had dairy and gluten, I felt worse. And so he comes in after he's done this for a few weeks, and he's making the changes himself, because he started writing it down. Like we always talk about writing things down, but he started seeing his own pattern, and he recognized that I don't feel good when I eat this stuff. And so he started actually, and this was a kid that would leave our office and go right to a vending machine. Loved the kid, but that was not, that's how they were initially rewarded him. Yeah. But he realized, he started skipping it because he's like, I don't feel good when I eat that stuff. And so I love that. One of the things that we do, right, is make sure the food's accessible, right? Chet, our son, loves bananas and apples and watermelon. Those are like his three that he can just eat it all day. So we just make sure it's accessible for him. He doesn't have to ask us to go eat fruit. We make that, just when you want fruit, you go get it, buddy. But it's in a place where he can go grab it, right? It's off of it's low for him, so he doesn't have to climb up on anything. And that seems so simple, but he goes for it because he doesn't need to ask us. He's empowered, right? He can make his own food choice. And so sometimes it's just those little things that you can do that really empowers them. But if they're old enough to write it down, I suggest you have them write it down, because that really clicked for him. And it was a neat moment for him to tell me, hey, you know what? I don't have to go to the vending machine. I don't want to, because I know it makes me feel bad. But also tying it to things like I got lots of kids that play sports, right? And they want to be good at sports and play sports. And so making that connection, when you eat this stuff and you don't feel good, it's harder to play on the field, right? It's just not as easy. You don't feel as good. and that makes a big connection for them as well. So whatever they like, right? It's about them, and when they do it for themselves, that's when it really sticks.
For sure. Yeah, we are in every single session, we are connecting what we're doing, the activities, as well as our nutrition program, to things they care about. If they don't care that they're struggling in school or that they're going to detention all the time, we're not going to connect it to that. We're going to connect it to how it's going to make them a better baseball player, how it's going to help them be a better, artist, open up their creativity, whatever they're into, you can connect the dots in that way. And because so many of these kids, part of big picture is seeing reward and consequence and cause and effect, and they don't necessarily, we have to think about intentionally pointing out things and helping them connect the dots, not just filling in all the blanks for them on things that are not going to be organic for them, that might be for us so frequently. So I love that you're growing the brain, but you're connecting the dots. We've had so many kids where the parents start off saying, our kids love coming here. There's no way they're going to do the dietary program. There's such, this, that, and the other. Man, they are going to go off. And I said, give it a little time, because success begets success too. You don't go for, if you haven't exercised in forever, this could be any goal I'm talking about. You don't say, I'm going to run a marathon next week. You start off with little goals that then build up to bigger and bigger things. One rung on the ladder, the next thing is just one more step. The better these kids start feeling, and the more regulated and the more mindful and the more body-brain connection there is, the more the executive function grows. We have had kids voluntarily, without their parents even being present, saying, hey, you've been talking about this. Did you tell me more about that? I think I want to give that a go. It starts sinking in, and they start connecting the dots.
Yeah, little wins lead to big wins. That's just the way it is. And so, just find areas that they can get small wins. Trust me, these kids, when they, here's one of the things is, I don't think, I know, let me rephrase it. I know some of these kids don't feel good. They just don't recognize that they don't feel good.
Because they've never felt good.
They've never felt good. And so once you start getting these little wins, and like, I don't feel like I used to feel, they want that, right? Because that's more time they can spend with their friends. They're not, when you don't feel good and you isolate, right? That's part of our design, is when we're inflamed and not feeling it, we naturally withdraw. So these kids will naturally withdraw sometimes. And so they miss out with friends or sports or whatever it may be, right? Something they want to participate in, but they don't know why, because they've never felt good. So they just naturally withdraw. That's how their biology is designed, and they don't know. Like Heather's saying, they don't know what they don't know, and they don't know what it's like to ever have felt good and energized. And so you start giving them a little bit of momentum, they will take off. They will start literally running for you, because they want to feel good. They don't want to feel bad. They just need that win. That's what they need. It's just a small win. And these kids, it's so impressive what they will do once they start feeling better, right? They want it.
Yeah. Yes. And a lot of the kids do start noticing, I just feel better, and hey, I haven't gotten in trouble in a while, and I haven't gotten in a fight with a friend, or I'm getting, everything's just more peaceful. I'm getting my homework done better. Some kids, I think we've all had this experience where we accomplish something and we still have a view of our former selves before we grew in that particular way. There have been people who lose a lot of weight, and everyone sees the change, but when they look in the mirror, they still see that former image. They decided on a healthier lifestyle, and it takes a while for that to totally sink in. And so we always talk about offering specific praise, not about an accomplishment specifically, not about an act, not about a grade, not about being the MVP, but hey, I noticed today how much more patient you are with your sister. You were so kind. Hey, do you realize you did this paper all by yourself and you didn't even get up and tear the paper? Like, you are showing such perseverance. Talk about process, and then you need to intentionally help them start seeing those things. What kind of things are you seeing and feeling? Yep. They really need to think about it, because they might be in automation mode. They get into these negative ruts of thinking. That's another thing we do, is identify the negative thought patterns. There are about 9 categories of thought patterns that tend to develop when kids have been struggling, or adults. And this can happen as a result of trauma or neurodevelopment, all or nothing thinking, catastrophizing. There are many different things. And we have them identify, which ones of these resonate with you. And then we have them do activities. And then you can relate it to whatever it is they're struggling with, whether it is a healthy lifestyle physically, whether it is poor choices, whether it is a goal they have and how that type of thinking may get in the way. And when you break through those ruts of thinking, you have that flexibility and their relationship, not just with people, but with food and exercise, and everything changes.
100%.
Yeah.
It is quite neat to see the changes that these kids will go and make when they feel amazing. And so there's one thing I want to talk about here because lots of kiddos that I see specifically, so I'll speak to myself, but started off on, chronic ear infections. So some of the first few symptoms, right? And a lot of times they're treated with antibiotics, right? And so, a lot of these kids start off with poor gut bacteria flora, right? And so sometimes it's that poor flora that also leads to, these food choices, but also is playing a role again in, development and in emotional control and just how we feel and sleep and all of that hormonal stuff that's involved with that. And so part of the reason I want to touch on that just real briefly, I don't want to make it a long thing, but that's an important thing to look at, right? Like, talk to your healthcare provider about foods that promote good stomach flora, because that plays a role in serotonin levels and other things play a role, mood and all this other stuff. And so, when we look at, because I know both of us look at a kid as a whole, right? They're not a symptom. They're not a diagnosis. We don't view kids that way. They are a person in front of us, a very tangible being. There are lots of components to that individual. But that's one of the things that I often don't hear a lot about is, or they'll ask me questions like, I don't know about probiotics, or I don't know what foods promote good health in the gut. And so those are really important things to also consider, because I've had amazing kids who, they kind of start plateauing, and we change some of the foods and we see sparks in their gut flora and woo, big changes. So it's neat to see, but that also can play a massive role in the food choices they make and maybe some weight changes that we see too.
Yeah.
So
yeah, there are, you can even Google like whatever your child's struggles are, brain healthy foods for blah blah blah, and because there are very specific nutrients in foods that will help naturally increase dopamine production, that will help naturally increase serotonin, like whatever the things are, like depression. Our body is our fuel, and that doesn't just mean it gives us energy so we can walk across. It means it is foundational for everything else we do. Harvard Medical School says the gut and the brain are so intertwined, they should be considered one system.
Yep. 100%. Yeah. It's called the second brain in some books that you may read. It's called the second brain. 100%. I agree. It plays a massive role in hormonal health, neurochemical health, in vitamin and mineral absorption, right? Some of these kids are just so deficient. They struggle even just with the incredible care that we're giving them. Sometimes they will struggle just because they're so nutrient deficient. Because I don't care what some of those labels on the back say, that you're just not getting the same nutritional value that you get when you eat food that grows in nature. So, but anyways, is there anything else that you would like to touch on here, Heather? I think what I wanted to talk about, we pretty much have hit here. Is there anything that you would like to touch on?
No, I mean, on all of these topics, it's something we could talk about for hours, or I think this is a good bite-sized chunk.
Yes. And so, let me ask you this really quick, just from a brain balance standpoint. You do have a nutritional program that you all utilize. Is that correct?
We do, because about 90% of the students we see have food sensitivities, and that does not mean an allergy. They can have an allergy test and it shows up negatively. But just like the brain is not telling them how to focus or regulate or read or whatever, the messages from the brain to the gut about how to process food are off. And so it exacerbates the memory issue. It exacerbates the attention, the emotions, etc. And so we figure out what those sensitivities are. We have a registered dietitian, a team of nutritionists. And so it's a customized plan that supports it because it all goes together. Yeah.
Love it. Yes. Dr. Brittany handles a lot of the sensitivity testing in here. So I do all the neural stuff and she does all the nutritional stuff. But what I love about that and what Heather pointed to is sensitivity. Okay. Sensitivity, because I've had kids, they come in, they've had almost every test run on earth. And they're looking for allergies, like, I eat a peanut and I need an EpiPen sort of thing versus a sensitivity. Those are two different things. They're in the same family, but they're different. Okay. And so they play an important role. So that's why, we love working with Brain Balance and, in the connection we have here, because we see things in such a similar way. I love it. And so, but find somebody that does sensitivity testing because it's so important. And so that's amazing. All right. This is a big topic, not one that I think we have enough time to go in depth in, but I think this was a good point. But I wanted to highlight that Brain Balance does do sensitivity testing, which I think is absolutely vital. And we do sensitivity testing as well, which is so important for understanding these kids and their behavior. So, all right, Heather, you have another podcast.
I do.
No, I'm just teasing. And it's on Mondays at 2:00.
Yes, not going to happen this Monday because it's Labor Day. Happy holiday weekend to everyone, by the way. But the following Monday we'll be back. Yeah.
Awesome. So make sure that you go. And Heather, what pages can they find this podcast on?
At The Hidden Churn on Instagram or Facebook, or Brain Balance of The Woodlands, Katy, Mansfield, or South Lake.
All right. So make sure you go follow those pages. Typically at Mondays at 2:00, except for holiday weekends. But go follow those. They're always amazing. Your previous ones are still on those pages, correct?
They are, yes. You can go to the More tab, and there'll be a drop-down menu. It'll be videos, and the titles are pretty self-explanatory on what the concerns are that you would match what you need.
Perfect. So they're easy to find. Go to the More tab, drop down, lots of different topics, great topics that you'll definitely be interested in. So make sure you go there. If you need to get a hold of me, you can follow me on Facebook or Instagram at Dallas Energy Chiropractic, or you can call 972-387-4700. All right. We will be back next week. Yes. All right. Now you got me worried there's a holiday in the middle of Thursday. No, there shouldn't be any holidays coming up for a little bit, but we'll be back. Of course, if you have any questions, please ask them in the comments. We'll be happy to answer for you. And otherwise, we will see you next week, next Thursday, same time, same channel. All right. Thank you so much, Heather.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.